It is August of 1941, and a Spitfire is tearing through the skies above northern France at over 300 miles per hour. The pilot at the controls has already downed more than 20 enemy aircraft. He is one of the most aggressive, most decorated fighter leaders in the Royal Air Force. German pilots across the English Channel know his name and fear his tactics. On this particular day, he is leading a wing of fighters on an offensive sweep near the town of Le Touquet when everything goes wrong. His aircraft is hit, the fuselage tears apart, and as the pilot struggles to bail out of his shattered cockpit, something happens that would be impossible for any other fighter ace in any air force on the planet. One of his legs gets trapped in the wreckage. Not a leg of flesh and bone, a leg made of metal and leather. Because the man in this cockpit, the man who has spent the last year terrorizing the Luftwaffe over the fields of France and the beaches of England, has no legs at all. His name is Douglas Bader. That was 1941. 10 years earlier, every doctor in England had told him he would never walk normally again, let alone fly a fighter plane in combat. How does a man with no legs end up becoming one of the deadliest pilots of the Second World War? Douglas Robert Stewart Bader was born on the 11th of February, 1910, in the St. John's Wood neighbourhood of London. His father, Frederick, was a civil engineer who had served in the First World War and returned home carrying wounds that would eventually kill him. Frederick Bader died in 1922 when Douglas was just 12 years old. The loss hit the family hard. His mother Jessie remarried not long after, and the relationship between Douglas and his stepfather was difficult from the start. The boy was headstrong, combative, and had a temper that teachers and family members would later describe as volcanic. Young Douglas was sent off to St. Edward's School in Oxford, a boarding school where he quickly became something of a legend. Not for his academics, which were perfectly average. For sports, Douglas Bader was one of those rare athletes who seemed to be good at everything he touched. Rugby, cricket, hockey, boxing. He played rugby with a ferocity and competitiveness that stood out even among teenage boys who were all trying to prove themselves. On the cricket pitch, he bowled fast and batted with a confidence that belied his age. His housemaster once described him as the finest all-around sportsman the school had ever produced. He was fearless, aggressive, and completely allergic to being told he could not do something. By the time he left St. Edward's, he was already being talked about as a potential England rugby player. Those traits, the raw physical talent, and the absolute refusal to accept limits, would define everything that came after. In 1928, at the age of 18, Bader entered the Royal Air Force College at Cranwell as a flight cadet. The RAF of the late 1920s was still flying biplanes, open cockpit machines that rattled through the sky and demanded as much physical stamina as they did technical skill. Bader took to flying the way he took to everything else, with total confidence and an almost reckless disregard for limits. He was good in the air, exceptionally good. His instructors noted his natural spatial awareness and his willingness to push an aircraft right to the edge of its performance envelope. He also continued to dominate on the sports field, playing rugby for the RAF team and being seriously considered for the England squad. He earned his wings, was commissioned as a pilot officer, and was posted to No. 23 Squadron at Kenley in 1930, where he flew Gloucester Gamecocks and later Bulldogs. Life was moving fast. He was known around the squadron as the kind of pilot who would try anything, the one who always volunteered for the formation displays, the one who pushed aerobatic maneuvers lower and faster than the regulations technically allowed. Douglas Bader was 21 years old, athletic, talented, and absolutely certain that nothing could stop him. If he had stopped here, this would be a very different story. On the 14th of December, 1931, Bader was at Woodley Airfield near Reading. Some accounts say he had been challenged by fellow pilots at the local aero club to perform some low-level aerobatics. Others suggest it was simply his own ego doing what his ego always did. Whatever the reason, Bader took his Bulldog biplane down low, far too low. He attempted a slow roll just above the ground, and the left wingtip of his aircraft clipped the earth. The plane cartwheeled and smashed apart across the airfield. The crash should have killed him, When rescuers pulled him from the wreckage, he was barely alive. He was rushed to the Royal Berkshire Hospital in Reading, where doctors fought to save him through the night. They could not save his legs. His right leg was amputated above the knee. His left leg was amputated below the knee. Douglas Bader, the greatest athlete anyone at St. Edward's had ever seen, the rugby player who was being groomed for international competition, the pilot with the golden touch, woke up in a hospital bed with nothing below his thighs but bandages. He was 21 years old. The next few months were, by every account, the darkest of his life. He nearly died twice from infections and complications. There was a period in early 1932 when the doctors were not sure he would make it at all. His body was in shock, fighting off sepsis, adjusting to the catastrophic trauma of 2 major amputations in the space of hours. Nurses later recalled that even in those early weeks, the thing that seemed to bother him most was not the pain. It was the idea that he might be pitied. Bader despised sympathy. He refused to treat his situation as a tragedy, even when everyone around him clearly believed it was. A nurse once tried to help him into a wheelchair, and he snapped at her so sharply that she left the room. He did not want help. He wanted to do it himself. When the hospital fitted him with a pair of prosthetic legs, crude metal and leather contraptions they called tin legs, the standard expectation was that a double amputee would take months or even years to learn basic mobility. Patients in his condition learned to shuffle along carefully with canes and take things slowly. Bader decided that was not going to be him. He gritted his teeth, grabbed the parallel bars, and started walking. He fell constantly. The stumps blistered and bled against the sockets. He got up every time. Within weeks, he was walking without a cane, swinging his tin legs forward with a distinctive rolling gait that anyone who knew him would later recognize from 100 yards away. Then he taught himself to drive a car with modified hand controls. Then he went dancing. The man had lost both of his legs, and within a year he was on a dance floor at a party, leading a woman through a foxtrot. I mean, think about that for a second. That is not normal stubbornness. That is something else entirely. By 1932, Bader had done something that the RAF Medical Board considered almost impossible. He had passed his flying medical. He could still fly an aircraft. He could operate the pedals with his prosthetic legs well enough to control a plane. And his reactions and instincts were just as sharp as they had been before the crash. He returned briefly to Kenley and flew solo again, proving that a man with 2 artificial legs could manage a military aircraft. For a moment, it looked like the story might have a quick, happy ending. The young pilot beats the odds, gets back in the cockpit, and carries on with his life. But the RAF did not see it that way. Despite passing every test they put in front of him, the Air Ministry decided in 1933 that a legless pilot was too much of a liability. They invalidated him out of the service. Douglas Bader, one of the most naturally gifted pilots in the Royal Air Force, was grounded. Not because he could not fly, because the paperwork said he should not. Bader spent the next several years working a desk job at the Asiatic Petroleum Company, which later became part of Shell Oil. He married a woman named Thelma Edwards in 1933, the same year the RAF had pushed him out. Thelma was, by all accounts, the one person who could actually manage Douglas Bader. She understood his temper and his pride. She knew that every morning when he strapped on his prosthetic legs and went to work behind a desk, a part of him was furious. He played golf, taking up the sport with his usual intensity and actually becoming quite good at it, shooting rounds that would embarrass plenty of able-bodied players. He drove his car aggressively. He lived a quiet, civilian life, and he hated every minute of it. Not because the life was bad, because he was supposed to be in the sky, and everyone who mattered had told him he was not allowed. Through the middle and late 1930s, he watched the situation in Europe deteriorate. Hitler's Germany was rearming. The threat of another war was growing more obvious by the month. Bader would look back on this period and wish the call had come sooner, but the truth was that the world had to break apart before anyone would give him another chance. He needed a war. On the 3rd of September, 1939, Britain declared war on Germany. Within days, Douglas Bader contacted the Air Ministry and demanded to be reinstated. This time, the RAF was not in a position to be picky about who could fly. They needed every trained pilot they could get. After months of bureaucratic wrangling, Bader was reactivated in November of 1939, nearly 7 years after being forced out. He was posted to a refresher course, transitioned to modern monoplane fighters, and by early 1940, he was flying Spitfires with No. 19 Squadron at Duxford. The man with no legs was back in a cockpit, and the war was about to make sure nobody forgot it. His first taste of combat came during the evacuation of Dunkirk in late May and early June of 1940. Hundreds of thousands of British and Allied soldiers were trapped on the beaches of northern France, and the RAF was flying desperate sorties across the Channel to provide air cover against the Luftwaffe bombers trying to destroy the evacuation fleet below. Bader was now with No. 22 Squadron, and over those smoke-covered beaches, he shot down his first enemy aircraft, a Messerschmitt 109. The kill confirmed something he had suspected since the day the RAF told him he could not fly. They were wrong. He shot down another fighter soon after, then a bomber. He was aggressive in the air to a degree that startled even experienced pilots who had been flying combat missions for weeks. He attacked from angles that seemed suicidal. He pressed closer to his targets than anyone else dared. The prosthetic legs, it turned out, actually gave him one strange advantage. In high-speed maneuvers, the extreme forces of gravity pulled blood away from a pilot's brain and into the legs, causing blackouts. Bader had no blood circulation in his legs. He could sustain tighter turns and more violent maneuvers than most pilots without losing consciousness. The same crash that had taken his legs had, in a grim twist, made him harder to beat in a dogfight. In June of 1940, the RAF gave Bader command of No. 242 Squadron, a unit made up largely of Canadian pilots who had been badly mauled during the Battle of France. Morale was in the gutter. The squadron had lost men, lost planes, and lost faith that the brass had any idea what they were doing. Into this mess walked a 30-year-old pilot with no legs and an attitude that did not allow for self-pity. Bader turned the squadron around in weeks. He led from the front, flying every mission, demanding excellence, and absolutely refusing to accept excuses from men who still had both their legs. The Canadians went from demoralized to deadly. The Battle of Britain began in July of 1940, and this is where Bader became one of the most controversial and effective figures of the entire air war. The Luftwaffe was sending massive formations of bombers across the English Channel every day, protected by swarms of Messerschmitt fighters. Britain's survival depended on the RAF's ability to intercept and destroy those bombers before they could flatten airfields, factories, and cities. Bader and his superior, Air Vice Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory, who commanded 12 Group based further north at Duxford, developed what became known as the Big Wing tactic. The idea was simple in theory. Instead of sending individual squadrons of 12 aircraft to intercept German bomber formations one at a time, you would mass 3 or even 5 squadrons together into a single large wing of 36 to 60 fighters and hit the Germans with overwhelming force in one pass. When the Big Wing arrived over the battlefield, the psychological effect on German bomber crews was enormous. Imagine looking out of your cockpit and seeing 60 Hurricanes and Spitfires diving toward you in a single wave. The results were devastating when it worked. Bader led these massed formations into battle over the fields of southern England and the outskirts of London itself, and the sheer scale of the British response caught the Luftwaffe off guard on multiple occasions. But the Big Wing was deeply controversial. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park and Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, who commanded the frontline defences in 11 Group, argued that the time it took to assemble a Big Wing meant the bombers were already hitting their targets before the fighters could arrive. The debate became bitter and personal. Bader, characteristically, did not care about politics or diplomacy. He believed his tactic worked. He had the kills to prove it, and anyone who disagreed could watch him do it again. Which, looking back, was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, probably both. By the spring of 1941, the Battle of Britain was won, and the RAF had shifted from defense to offense. Bader was now leading the Tangmere wing, based at the famous RAF Tangmere airfield on the south coast of England in West Sussex. The wing consisted of several fighter squadrons conducting offensive sweeps across the English Channel into occupied France. These missions were called rhubarbs and circuses, operations designed to draw the Luftwaffe up into combat and destroy German fighters over their own territory. It was dangerous work. The RAF was now doing what the Luftwaffe had done the previous summer, flying over enemy-held ground where any pilot who was shot down would be captured or killed rather than returned to his squadron. Bader threw himself into these operations with his usual intensity, sometimes flying 2 or 3 sorties in a single day. His personal score kept climbing. By the summer of 1941, he had been credited with 22 aerial victories, a mix of confirmed individual kills and shared kills with other pilots. He was one of the highest-scoring fighter aces in the RAF. Magazines and newspapers in Britain wrote about him constantly. The BBC ran features on him. The Legless pilot who refused to stay on the ground had become one of the most famous men in the country, a living symbol of British defiance at a time when the nation desperately needed one. Pay attention to this next detail, because it explains everything about what happened next. On the 9th of August, 1941, Bader was leading a sweep over Le Touquet in northern France when his Spitfire was hit. There is still debate about exactly what happened. Some historians believe he was shot down by a Messerschmitt 109. Others think he collided with a German aircraft during a chaotic dogfight. Bader himself was never certain. What is certain is that his Spitfire was torn apart and he had to bail out. As he tried to leave the cockpit, his right prosthetic leg became jammed in the fuselage. For a terrifying few seconds, Bader was pinned to a disintegrating aircraft falling through the sky over occupied France. The leather straps on his prosthetic finally snapped and he tumbled free, pulled his parachute and floated down into enemy territory with only one artificial leg. He landed in a field near the town of St. Omer and was quickly captured by German soldiers. They took him to a local hospital, and what happened next was one of the stranger episodes of the entire war. The Germans treated Bader not as a prisoner but almost as a celebrity. Luftwaffe fighter ace Adolf Galland, one of Germany's top pilots, personally visited him, and the two men sat together talking about aerial tactics like colleagues at a professional conference rather than enemies in the middle of a global war. Galland was reportedly fascinated by Bader and deeply respectful of what he had accomplished. He arranged for Bader to sit in the cockpit of a Messerschmitt 109 at his airfield, and Bader, never one to miss an opportunity, joked that he would love to take it up for a quick flight. Galland politely declined. Meanwhile, the matter of Bader's missing prosthetic leg had become an actual diplomatic issue. The RAF contacted the Germans through the Red Cross and requested permission to drop a replacement leg by parachute. The Germans agreed. In a mission that became known as Operation Leg, a British bomber flew over the St. Omer area during a regular bombing raid and dropped a crate containing a new prosthetic limb. And no, that is not made up. The Royal Air Force conducted a military airdrop to deliver a spare leg to a prisoner of war. The whole thing sounds like a scene from a comedy, but it was completely real. Once Bader had both his legs back, the problems for his German captors began almost immediately. He tried to escape from the hospital by tying bedsheets together and climbing out of a window. He was caught. He tried again at his next camp. Caught again. He organized tunnels, bribed guards, and generally made himself the most difficult prisoner in any facility that held him. The Germans quickly realized that Douglas Bader was not the kind of man who was going to sit quietly behind barbed wire and wait for the war to end. He was moved from camp to camp, each one more secure than the last. Eventually, in August of 1942, the Germans made the decision that many of Bader's fellow prisoners found almost flattering. They sent him to Oflag 4C, better known as Colditz Castle. Colditz was where the Germans put the escape artists, the troublemakers, the prisoners who simply refused to stay captured. It held British, French, Polish, and Dutch officers who had already escaped from other camps. men who had already proven they would do almost anything to get free. It was a medieval fortress perched on a cliff above the Mulde River in Saxony, with walls 12 feet thick and guards posted at every conceivable exit point. It was supposed to be escape-proof. Bader spent the rest of the war there, nearly 3 years inside those stone walls. Even at Colditz, surrounded by the tightest security the German military could muster, he remained defiant. He refused to cooperate with his captors in any meaningful way. He would stand at the window during roll call and make sarcastic comments loud enough for the guards to hear. He was disciplined, punished, had privileges revoked. The guards confiscated his prosthetic legs on more than one occasion to prevent him from trying another escape. You would think someone would have said something. Nobody did. That was Bader. He did not bend. For a while, things at Colditz actually settled into a strange routine. The prisoners organized their own entertainment, held classes, put on theatrical performances. Bader participated when it suited him and clashed with everyone when it did not. He was not easy to live with. Several fellow prisoners later admitted that Bader's personality could be abrasive, that his refusal to compromise on anything made him exhausting as both a leader and a companion. He was, by all accounts, exactly who he appeared to be at all times, brave to a fault and stubborn beyond reason. In April of 1945, American forces of the First Army reached Colditz Castle and liberated the prisoners inside. Bader had been a prisoner of war for nearly 4 years. He walked out of the fortress on his tin legs with the same straight-backed posture he had maintained since the day he decided that nobody would ever see him limp. The Americans who liberated the camp later said they had no idea he was a double amputee until someone told them. His gait was that steady, his bearing that rigid. Within weeks of liberation, he was already agitating to get back into a fighter. The war in Europe was over, but Bader initially volunteered for the Pacific Theater before Japan's surrender in August ended that possibility too. He did get one final moment in the cockpit that would have seemed like fiction to anyone who did not know the story behind it. On the 15th of September, 1945, the anniversary of the hardest-fought day of the Battle of Britain, Douglas Bader led a victory flyover of 300 aircraft over London. Spitfires, Hurricanes, Lancasters, Mosquitoes, all thundering over the rooftops of a city that had survived the Blitz. And at the front of that formation, the man flying lead had no legs. A double amputee, just months out of a German prison fortress, leading hundreds of warplanes over the capital of a nation that had just won the most devastating war in human history. If you had told that story to the doctors at the Royal Berkshire Hospital in 1931, not one of them would have believed a word of it. Bader retired from the RAF in 1946 with the rank of Group Captain and returned to Shell Oil, where he had worked before the war. The company gave him a role that suited his personality perfectly, traveling the world as a kind of roving ambassador. He flew himself to meetings in his own aircraft, because of course he did. But the work that defined his post-war life had nothing to do with oil. Bader became one of the most prominent advocates for disabled people in Britain. He visited hospitals and rehabilitation centers across the country, talking to amputees and people who had suffered life-changing injuries. He spent countless hours sitting by bedsides, convincing men and women who had lost limbs that their lives were not over. His approach was never gentle. He did not offer soft reassurance or tell people that everything would be okay. He told them to stop feeling sorry for themselves and get on with it, which was exactly what he had done. Some found his directness inspiring, the kick they needed to start fighting back. Others found it infuriating, the last thing they wanted to hear from a man who seemed to dismiss their suffering. Both reactions were probably the intended effect. His life story was turned into a book called Reach for the Sky by Paul Brickhill in 1954, and then into a film of the same name starring Kenneth More in 1956. The book and the movie made Bader a household name well beyond the military community. He was awarded a CBE in 1956 and knighted in 1976, becoming Sir Douglas Bader. He continued his advocacy work and public appearances right up until the 5th of September, 1982. when he died of a heart attack at the age of 72 after attending a dinner in London. The same determination that sent a legless man back into a cockpit, that turned a broken squadron into a fighting force, that drove escape attempt after escape attempt from German prison camps, that same stubborn refusal to accept limits is what people remember when they hear the name Douglas Bader. His combat record is impressive on paper. 22 victories, a Distinguished Service Order and bar, a Distinguished Flying Cross and bar. There are aces from the Second World War with higher kill counts. There are pilots who flew more missions, but none of them did it without legs. Every single one of Bader's victories was supposed to be impossible. Every mission he flew, every German aircraft he shot down, every formation he led across the English Channel was done by a man that the medical establishment, the military bureaucracy, and basic common sense had all written off as finished before he turned 22. The tin legs that clattered across the tarmac at Tangmere, that got jammed in a shattered Spitfire cockpit over France, that walked out of Colditz Castle in 1945, those legs carried a man who flat out refused to be grounded by anything or anyone. Douglas Bader did not prove an abstract lesson about the human spirit. He proved something much simpler and much harder. He proved that the only person who gets to decide what you can and cannot do is you. If this story hit you the way it hit us, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us which moment in Bader's life you found the most unbelievable. And if you want more stories like this, hit that like button so we know to keep making them.